What I've learned from running is that the time to push hard is when you're hurting like crazy and you want to give up. Success is often just around the corner. That is an excerpt from James Dyson's autobiography, Against the Odds, the book and story we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Knowledge Project podcast. I'm your host, Shane Parrish. This podcast helps you master the best of what other people have already figured out. If you want to take your learning to the next level, consider joining our membership program at fs.blog/membership. As a member, you'll get early access to episodes, no ads, including this, exclusive content, hand-edited transcripts, access to the repository, which has highlights from all my favorite books, including Dyson's autobiography, which we used to make this episode. Check out the link in the show notes for more. Behind every revolutionary product lies a moment of everyday frustration. For James Dyson, it was watching his vacuum cleaner lose suction as its bag filled with dust, a problem millions around the world simply accepted as inevitable. What happened next defies conventional wisdom. 5 years, 5,126 failed prototypes, near financial ruin, and a kitchen floor covered in cardboard and masking tape. Today, we explore how a self-described misfit transformed frustration into a multi-billion-dollar empire by embracing an uncomfortable truth. Failure isn't just a step on the path to success, it is the path itself. We'll unpack Dyson's philosophy, why experts are often the biggest obstacles to innovation, how losing control of his first company shaped his future business decisions, the standard of excellence, and why action leads to progress. Whether you're building a business, solving complex problems, or simply trying to navigate uncertainty, Dyson's journey offers powerful insights on turning disadvantages into advantages and building something truly original. And make sure you stick around at the end for my lessons you can take away from Dyson and apply to your own life. And check out our website for key takeaways from the episode. It's time to listen and learn. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only. Picture this, a cold October night in 1978 in a modest English kitchen. A 31-year-old man kneels amid scraps of cardboard, masking tape, and the gutted carcass of a vacuum cleaner, like the aftermath of a kindergarten project gone rogue. Upstairs, his wife and 3 young children sleep, unaware their home has become ground zero for what, after 15 years, 5,126 prototypes will become a multi-billion-dollar revolution. The man, James Dyson, has just committed a household crime. He's torn the bag off the family's reconditioned Hoover Jr. vacuum cleaner. This isn't a tantrum, although Dyson was certainly angry. For months, he quietly simmered over a frustration so mundane that most accepted it as inevitable. Vacuum cleaners lose suction as their bags fill. Most people simply buy new bags. James Dyson isn't most people. He dismantles the entire machine. Now armed with cardboard tape and an insight borrowed from an industrial sawmill's dust extraction system, he's about to cobble together something vacuum manufacturers worldwide had insisted was impossible. A vacuum cleaner that doesn't lose suction. A vacuum cleaner without a bag. And while that might seem common today, for a while James Dyson was the only person in the world with a bagless vacuum cleaner. He couldn't have known then that his journey of kitchen floor experiments would lead to years of struggle, thousands of failed prototypes, near financial ruin, countless people saying no, lawsuits, and it would ultimately culminate in the transformation of an entire industry. When Dyson showed people his prototype, industry experts quickly offered their verdict. If a better vacuum were possible, Hoover or Electrolux would have invented it already. This dismissive logic that if something were possible, industry giants would have already done it is the comfortable assumption incumbents have relied on throughout history, right until an outsider proves them catastrophically wrong. It's the same reasoning that led to Western Union to dismiss the telephone, or IBM to scoff at personal computers, or Kodak to overlook the digital camera. For Dyson, their skepticism became fuel. The certainty he was onto something precisely because people said he wasn't. This is the story of James Dyson, a man who turned dust into possibility, failure into discovery, and frustration into revolution. That kitchen floor epiphany in 1978 was the culmination of a lifetime of swimming against the current. But to understand how James Dyson came to be kneeling there, surrounded by cardboard and tape, we need to go back 3 decades to where his story begins. James was born in a seaside town of Cromer, Norfolk on May 2nd, 1947, the third child to Alec and Mary Dyson. Alec was a classics teacher, respectable but far from wealthy. The family lived in comfortable middle-class circumstances, the kind that provided security without excess. But that security would prove fragile. When James was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His father died of cancer, leaving behind a widow and 3 children suddenly facing precarious financial circumstances. This moment would have derailed many families, closing doors of opportunity and narrowing horizons. For young James, though, it created the most powerful of motivational forces, the sense of being an underdog that would stay with him throughout his entire life. His death, he would later reflect, put me at a great disadvantage compared to the other boys. It made me feel like an underdog, someone who was always going to have things taken away from him. Dyson's reflections on his father's death reveal something more nuanced than simply hardship. As Dyson said, it made me feel like I was alone in the world, which inevitably, in better moments, will also make a small boy feel special. This tension between vulnerability and a sense of being different would become a creative engine for Dyson throughout his life. Dyson also found himself constantly tested in ways that would forge his competitive spirit. He recalled, everyone in the house, my mother, my brother, my sister, and all the other children were older than I was. So when we played games like Bulldog and Lurkey, I was always up against people who were bigger and stronger than I was. Rather than being crushed by this constant disadvantage, young James developed a tenacity that would serve him well in later battles against industrial giants. It raised my standards in that I was not prepared to lose everything all the time just because I was the youngest, and taught me that I could take on something much bigger than I was and win. That phrase, raise my standards, sticks out to me here. One of the greatest benefits of reading biographies and studying the best in any field is that you discover what your standards could be. We start life with whatever luck hands us, our parents, our family, our school, our friends. Their standards become our standards over time. But if life doesn't luckily put us into an environment with high standards, we've got to set our own as high as possible. And there's no better way than learning from outliers like Dyson, people who refuse to settle to lift our own trajectory. Now let's go back to his story. Dyson makes an unexpected but telling connection between these childhood contests and his future business conflicts. Combined with the loss of my father, this made me very competitive. And in the wider picture, there is really not so great a difference between a rampaging industrial giant trying to sue you out of business and a hulking great 15-year-old trying to knock you off a rock or duck you in the sea. The headmaster of Gresham School, where James boarded, saw something in the fatherless boy worth investing in. He offered James and his brothers a generous bursary to continue their education and board at the school despite their changed financial circumstances, allowing their mother to go out and work. Years later, as one of the country's wealthiest individuals, Dyson would remember this critical intervention, pouring millions into educational philanthropy with the knowledge that one opportunity at the right moment can change everything for not only a person, but an entire family. At Gresham's, James found a quiet obsession: cross-country running. While most boys chase team sports or short sprints, he thrived in the solitary grind of distance. He trained relentlessly, rising early or running late on Norfolk's sand dunes. You would think he loved running. You'd be wrong. It wasn't joy that drove him. The act of running itself was not something I enjoyed, he admits. The best you could say for it was that it was lonely and painful. But as I started to win by greater and greater margins, I did it more and more because I knew the reason for my success was that out on the sand dunes, I was doing something no one else was doing. Let's stop here for a moment. 2 things stand out. First, while most avoid discomfort, Dyson leans into it, a rare trait that sets him apart. Second, being different isn't just an advantage, it's necessary. Joseph Tussman put it well. If you do what everyone else is doing, you're going to get the same results everybody else gets. But difference for its own sake isn't enough. It has to be the right kind, the kind that wins. That's advantageous divergence. Both of these qualities, the ability to embrace discomfort and the ability to be different and do something different, fuel his future triumphs. Now back to his story. Dyson ran alone on those dunes, knowing he stood apart. Going along with the crowd didn't interest him. In fact, it likely would have dulled his drive. He thrived knowing he'd forged his own course, a pattern that would define his career. Those solitary runs weren't just physical, they were mental prep for innovation's marathon. In business, the ability to take pain often makes the difference between success and failure. Around him, post-war Britain hummed with possibility. Britain still sat comfortably on top of the pile, at least that's how it felt to us then, he recalls. Britain's national mood was one of possibility and achievement. As Dyson put it, there was a coronation. We conquered Everest. We regained the ashes and beat all comers in test matches. We broke the 4-minute mile. There was the Festival of Britain and the Morris miners being exported all over the world. The message to a child seemed to be that Britain was the center of the universe and that you as an individual could conquer the world. This subtle environmental influence would later inform Dyson's willingness to challenge global industrial powers and make strong statements about the state of Britain's entrepreneurial and manufacturing spirit, which we'll get to later.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
When the time came to choose a path after Gresham School, Dyson made a decision that seemed to defy logic. This mathematically talented student chose art over engineering. In 1965, he enrolled at the Byam Shaw School of Art in London during what was typically a post-high school gap year, seemingly shunning the technical fields where his analytical mind might have shined naturally. This unconventional choice was partly driven by Dyson's rejection of artificial divisions in education, something that would later inform his approach to hiring and talent. It's the roaring inequity of our system that children face such decisions at a feckless age, he'd fumed. I went for humanities because I couldn't see the point in all of those formula you got in science, and I have spent the rest of my life not only attempting to turn the woolly-headed artist who left Gresham's into a scientist, but cursing the wrong-headedness of a system that forces students into such choices. Dyson's critique extended beyond the humanities sciences divide to what he saw as the deadening of creativity in the technical subjects, commenting that in woodworking class, if you didn't make the matchbox holder exactly as the teacher instructed, you'd get a clip around the ear. Fortunately, his instructors at the Byam Shaw School, particularly the painter Maurice de Sosmenez, recognized something unique in Dyson, an unusual blend of seeing both form and function, beauty and utility. His teacher became a critical influence, opening Dyson's eyes to design as a potential career and encouraging him to consider the Royal College of Art as the next step. Even before fully embracing engineering, Dyson was already developing the mindset that would define his approach to innovation, a willingness to challenge conventions and pursue his own vision. A telling incident occurred when he designed programs for a school production of Sheridan's The Critic. Rather than accepting the standard format for programs, always printed at the local press on folded A4 sheets and were extremely dull and nasty, Dyson chose to create scrolls on aged vellum effect paper. His housemaster's reaction was swift and harsh. "This is absolutely ridiculous. How dare you insult the great tradition of drama at the school with this folly?" When Dyson defended his choice as rather suitable and in the flavor of the period, the response was telling. "Programs, Dyson, should be flat." This early clash between innovation and convention left a lasting impression. Dyson says, "I was doing what I felt to be logical, current, original, unusual, and it was in the spirit of the production. And here was this bloody math teacher telling me that I was wrong for no better reason than that the program should be flat. I felt I was right and that he was wrong, and I feel that still." It was an early artistic rebuff by a bean counter, and in the years since then, I have developed a little more resistance to the reactionaries who put down whatever is new and unfamiliar. In 1966, Dyson advanced to the Royal College of Art. initially studying furniture and interior design as per his teacher's suggestion. Soon, his interest gravitated towards industrial engineering, a shift that might have been blocked in a more rigid academic environment. Fortunately, his professor at the time, Sir Hugh Casson, recognized Dyson's talents and interests defied conventional categorization, giving him the freedom to explore an unconventional path. Through it all, Dyson reinforced a pivotal lesson that would shape his entrepreneurial journey. Real innovation requires the courage to trust your instincts, even when others dismiss you as foolish. At the RCA, two mentors emerged that would profoundly shape Dyson's approach to innovation. The first was Anthony Hunt, a structural engineer and visiting tutor who encouraged Dyson's emerging fascination with engineering principles. The second, and more consequential, was Jeremy Fry, a successful British inventor and entrepreneur who recognized in Dyson a kindred spirit. Fry offered Dyson real-world engineering work while still a student, tapping into what he called Dyson's desire for making things. For a young man who had lost his father, this vote of confidence from an established figure came at a critical moment. It validated Dyson's unconventional approach and provided practical experience that formal education alone couldn't deliver. So began my association with Jeremy Fry, Dyson later recalled. A mentor as important to me as any of the engineering heroes of the past, with the great advantage of being alive and keen to nurture such talents as I possessed. What Dyson found most liberating about Fry's approach was his disdain for conventional expertise. He had no regard for experts from other fields, always teaching himself whatever he needed to know as he went along. And he was an engineer interested in building things that derived not only excellence from their design, but elegance as well. Though initially intimidated by Fry's status as a millionaire industrialist, Dyson was quickly won over by his self-confidence and willingness to take chances upon unproven talent. Here was a man who was not interested in experts. He meets me, he thinks to himself, here's a bright kid, let's employ him. And he does. He risks little with the possibility of gaining much. This approach would later influence Dyson's own hiring practices. It is exactly what I now do at Dyson Appliances, take on unformed graduates to throw youthful ideas around until they have given all they can and are ready to move on to new things. Fry's method of problem solving contrasted sharply with the academic approach Dyson had encountered at school and university. He did not, when an idea came to him, sit down and process it through pages and pages of calculation. He didn't argue through it with anyone. He just went out and built it. This hands-on trial and error approach was liberating for the young designer. When Dyson would approach Fry with an idea, the response was simply, you know where the workshop is, go and do it. If Dyson protested about needing specialized knowledge or equipment, Fry had a direct solution. Well then, go get a welder and weld it. Dyson found this approach revolutionary. Now, this was not a modus operandi that I had encountered before. College had taught me to revere experts and expertise. Fry ridiculed all of that. As far as he was concerned, with enthusiasm and intelligence, anything was possible. It's worth pausing here for a second. This just go build it attitude that Fry instilled in him reminds me of what Richard Hamming, this brilliant mathematician who worked at Bell Labs during its golden era, used to talk about. Hamming gave this now famous lecture called You and Your Research, where he essentially challenged how most of us get trapped in endless preparation mode. We're always getting ready to do the thing instead of just doing the thing. We're always talking about doing the thing instead of doing the thing. What's striking about both Hamming and what Dyson learned from Fry is this refreshing lack of reverence for credentials and formal expertise. Hamming described watching colleagues who would say, well, I need to go read one more paper, or I need to understand this concept better before I start. Meanwhile, the people who make breakthroughs just jumped in and started building. They'd figure it out along the way. Hamming's colleague, John Tukey, was like that. He didn't theorize endlessly. He just went out and built it. And that's exactly what Fry was pushing Dyson to do when he'd say, you know where the workshop is, or, well then, get a welder and weld it. This mindset appears consistently across different fields and eras. Hamming had this great line that I think about all the time. The particular thing you do is luck, but that you do something is not. And that perfectly applies to Dyson. Was it luck that he specifically invented a bagless vacuum cleaner? Maybe. But was it luck that he ended up building something significant? Not at all. Once you adopt this mindset of building rather than just thinking about building, creating rather than just planning to create, it becomes almost inevitable that you'll eventually create something meaningful. The vacuum was just what happened to be in front of him when all of these lessons clicked in place. For his final year project, Dyson abandoned the expected path of interior design students and instead collaborated with Fry to design a high-speed, flat-bottom boat called the Sea Truck. Rather than submitting theoretical drawings, Dyson built a working prototype, something that could be tested, refined, and ultimately commercialized. This leap from theory to practice marked Dyson's entrance into the world of invention. He had no prior boat building or welding experience. He simply learned by doing, often testing prototypes on weekends. It was a baptism by fire into the world of engineering, and it suited his temperament perfectly. The Sea Truck proved commercially viable. Fry's company manufactured it, and they were soon selling approximately 200 units annually. For a student project to become a profitable product was remarkable, and it taught Dyson early lessons about the relationship between design, manufacturing, and commerce that many inventors, let alone students, never learn. After graduation, Dyson became the sole salesperson for the Sea Truck, developing unique insights that would serve him well in his later business ventures. Selling back then was really pretty easy because I believed in what I was trying to push. As with selling anything, it was about seeing how the boat would fit into the life of the customer, not about mouthing off about how great it was. This customer-centric approach would become a cornerstone of Dyson's business philosophy. You find out what your man wants, and when he comes to you, he is buying it as soon as he starts talking, before you even start to sell. It is not about the right adjectives or shouting your mouth off. It's about discovering a need and satisfying it, not creating a need, by the way, as many of your cynical marketing men would have it. When selecting distributors for the Sea Truck, Dyson made an unconventional choice. Without exception, the best agents were the ones who, quite irrespective of their business or financial sense, saw the boat for what it was and loved it for it. While the temptation and board pressure was to hire established boat distributors who knew the market and would order vast numbers, I was determined to choose people who were mad keen on it. And his reasoning was sound. They were the only ones who would be able to overcome all the obstacles and difficulties of selling an entirely new concept and making a real business of it. The Sea Truck project also taught Dyson hard lessons about the dangers of trying to be all things to all customers. When approached by driving companies or oil corporations or the British military, Dyson would suggest that the Sea Truck could be modified to meet their specific requirements. I convinced not a single one of them, he admitted. People do not want all-purpose. They want high-tech specificity. This insight would later influence his approach to marketing the dual cyclone vacuum cleaner, where he focused specifically on its superiority as a vacuum rather than diluting the message with all the other features. One of the most illuminating incidents from the Sea Truck era came during a trip to Egypt in 1973. Dyson arrived in Cairo expecting that the Egyptians wanted modifications to the boat, such as armoring it like all the other militaries had requested. The reality surprised him. "Oh, no, that is the last thing we want," he was told by the Egyptians. "We sent one of our men out in a Sea Truck and tried to shoot him. We shot at him for hours and we couldn't make a mark. The boat rides so low in the water that it cannot be hit." This contrasted sharply with the approach taken by the British Navy, which according to Dyson had spent 2 years trying to make the Sea Truck suit their needs. By the time they had spent an absolute fortune on armor plating and special diesel engines to power it, they had turned my lovely launchcraft into an iron behemoth that couldn't manage more than about 10 miles an hour. Dyson saw in this a cultural difference between problem solving. The trial and error approach of the Egyptians, on the other hand, had been pure Edison. Rather than over-engineering the solution, they had tested the product in real-world conditions immediately and discovered an inherent advantage. As Dyson's involvement with the Sea Truck began to wane, he observed another critical principle of innovation. But when difficulties arose, they just shelved the whole thing, something that always seemed to happen when the original designer does not stay on his project. This self-belief is not there to press on through the hard times. This insight would later fuel Dyson's determination to maintain control over his inventions, seeing them through from concept to market despite setbacks and opposition. Most significantly, Dyson was developing a philosophy about innovation that would guide him throughout his career. He embraced the willingness to question basic assumptions and pursue solutions that established experts dismiss. This mindset would eventually lead him to look at a sawmill cyclone dust extractor and wonder, could this replace the vacuum cleaner that everyone takes for granted? Well, the industry experts assumed that if a better vacuum cleaner were possible, manufacturers would have already made it by then. This self-awareness about his unconventional approach would become a defining characteristic of Dyson's innovation philosophy. Looking back on his journey, he reflected, "I have been a misfit throughout my professional life, and that seems to have worked to my advantage. Misfits are not born or made, they make themselves, and a stubborn, opinionated child desperate to be different and right encounters only smaller refractions of the problem he will always experience, and he carries the weight of that dislocation forever." This self-awareness that his misfit status was both a burden and a blessing explains Dyson's resilience in the face of rejection and criticism. His early experiences taught him that being different, while often uncomfortable, could also be a source of great strength. As Dyson's early career took shape, he was developing principles that would guide his future endeavors. One crucial insight came from a seemingly modest business venture. "My only business venture until now had been selling cheap wine that a friend of mine was importing from Tarragona in southern Spain. Wine was beginning to catch on in Britain in the late 60s, and this unlabeled plonk had a certain cachet among the arty." From this experience, Dyson extracted a principle that would become central to his business philosophy. The only way to make real money is to offer the public something entirely new that has style as well as substance, and which they cannot get anywhere else. This commitment to creating something genuinely new, rather than merely improving on existing products, would drive Dyson to pursue innovations that others dismissed as impossible or unnecessary. "I didn't want to put the icing on other people's creations," he declared. "I wanted to make things." As the 1970s began, Dyson was poised to apply these lessons and principles to new challenges. He had experienced the thrill of bringing the C-Truck from concept to market, absorbed Jeremy Fry's unorthodox approach to problem solving, and begun developing his own philosophy about the intersection of art, design, and engineering. "I discovered the confidence and the stupidity to start doing things differently," he reflected. A simple statement that captures the paradoxical mix of self-assurance and risk-taking that characterizes innovation. Armed with this confidence and the lessons learned from the C-Truck project, Dyson was about to turn his attention into something far more mundane than high-speed boats, yet potentially more revolutionary: the humble wheelbarrow. The gardeners of England in the mid-1970s had no idea that they were inspiring a revolution. As they struggled with their conventional wheelbarrows, fighting to keep the narrow wheels from sinking into the wet soil, James Dyson was watching with the calculating eye of someone who sees not what is, but what could be. For centuries, the wheelbarrow had remained essentially unchanged, a container perched precariously on a single narrow wheel, a design that made it perpetually unstable and virtually useless on soft ground. Most people accepted these limitations as inevitable, the unavoidable physics of a simple tool. But Dyson, fresh from his experience with the C-Truck, saw these frustrations differently, not as immutable facts of life, but as a design problem waiting to be solved. The solution he developed was elegant in its simplicity. Replace the wheel with a ball. A sphere distributes weight across a wider surface area, preventing sinking. It also allows movement in any direction without having to lift and reposition the barrel. The idea seemed obvious in retrospect, raising the question that would become familiar throughout Dyson's career. Why hadn't nobody thought of this before? In 1974, he unveiled the ball barrow, a reinvention that replaced the traditional wheel with a large orange plastic sphere. The ball distributed weight more evenly and, crucially, wouldn't sink into soft soil or mud. Its wider footprint provided stability that the conventional wheelbarrow couldn't match. Dyson gave it bright colors and a modern form, turning a utilitarian tool into something with aesthetic appeal. The ball barrow wasn't just different for difference sakes, it genuinely worked better. When featured on BBC's Tomorrow World technology program, it introduced viewers to Dyson's fundamental approach: identify a common frustration, question assumption, and engineer a solution from first principles. Within a year of launch, the company was selling 45,000 ball barrows annually, a remarkable success for a product category most people considered fully mature. But commercial success masked a looming disaster. In setting up the ball barrow company, Dyson had made what would prove to be a crucial error. In 1974, when I had wanted to do the ball barrow and my brother-in-law generously offered to part fund it, I had rather stupidly assigned the patent of the ball barrow not to myself, but to the company. Dyson later confessed. This seemingly innocuous decision would prove catastrophic. To launch the ball barrow, Dyson and his partners borrowed £200,000, about $275,000, at a punishing 24% interest rate, a reflection of Britain's troubled economy in the mid-1970s. As the business expanded, they needed more capital, which meant bringing in new investors. Each round of investment diluted Dyson's personal ownership stake. The business grew to an annual turnover of £600,000. It captured more than half of the UK garden wheelbarrow market, Dyson recalled, but even so, we didn't make any money. The ball barrow had become the most frustrating of business scenarios, a popular product that couldn't turn into a profitable business. The situation deteriorated when a former employee defected to a competing American company that had previously discussed licensing the ball barrow. Soon, a knockoff version appeared in the US market, with a brazen competitor even using photos of the original ball barrow in their marketing materials. It was corporate betrayal at its most flagrant. And the company's board, against Dyson's wishes, opted to pursue expensive legal action against the American imitator. This drained resources and created yet another financial crisis requiring additional investment, further diluting Dyson's ownership stake while shifting the company's focus from improving their product. Meanwhile, Dyson's interests were already shifting. What I really wanted to do was make the vacuum cleaner I had in mind rather than fight the plagiarist in Chicago, as the board was keen on doing, he explained. This divergence in priorities foreshadowed the coming rupture. In February of 1979, the other shareholders unceremoniously forced Dyson out of his own company. I couldn't have been more surprised when my fellow shareholders booted me out, Dyson recalled. There was no apparent reason for this. He later discovered that the son of the other major shareholder had orchestrated the coup to take control of the business. The ejection was professionally devastating. I had lost 5 years of my work by not valuing my creation. I had failed to protect the one thing that was most valuable to me, Dyson reflected. If I had kept control, I could have done what I wanted to do and avoided a big interest bill. The final insult was that the company lawyer, the very person who might have protected Dyson's interests, was the one who delivered the termination. I was now without a lawyer, I was clueless about compensation for loss of office, and my shares were worthless. This bitter experience taught Dyson several crucial lessons that would shape his future business decisions. First, he learned the paramount importance of maintaining control of his intellectual property. In his words, I learned very much the hard way that I should have held on to the ball barrow patent and licensed the company. In the event, I lost the license, the patent, and the company. Second, he developed a deep aversion to outside shareholders who could dictate company direction, or worse, push him out. From now on, though, I was determined not to let go of my own inventions, patents, and companies, he vowed. This commitment to maintaining ownership would become a defining characteristic of Dyson's future business approach. He also gained hard-won insights about commercial strategy. The ball barrow had been priced too low while competing against traditional wheelbarrows that had no design innovation costs to recoup. In retrospect, the very idea of selling against a utility product was a mistake, Dyson concluded. The product was good, but the commercial proposition was a bad idea. This painful episode also reinforced Dyson's developing philosophy about business itself that stood in stark contrast to the prevailing corporate culture of the 1970s in Britain. In his view, something fundamental had changed in how companies were being run. Car companies used to be run by people who loved cars, he observed. They knew how to make the cars themselves, and they were always trying to make them better. Retail companies were run by people who knew how to sell. Now they're run by accountants and marketing people who don't understand the product or the customer. This shift from product-centered to finance-centered management troubled Dyson deeply. He saw it as the root cause of declining British manufacturing and innovation. Engineering and design is not about that. It is a long-term way of regenerating a company and, by extension, a country. If the city, fat cats and their banks and the monsters the Thatcher Revolution made into prime movers demand an instant return, we just sell our products better. We don't improve them. As he faced an uncertain future in 1979, Dyson had no idea that his next project would not only transform his fortunes, but an entire industry. And it would begin with the most ordinary of household irritations, a vacuum cleaner that kept losing suction. Before we get to Dyson's next project, we need to travel back in time a bit to understand the history of the vacuum cleaner. The year is 1901. Queen Victoria's reign is coming to an end, and in a London office, an engineer named Hubert Cecil Booth is conducting a peculiar experiment. He's on his hands and knees, pressing his handkerchief against the carpet and sucking through it with all of his might. After a moment, he examines the cloth and finds it impregnated with dust. This impromptu experiment, conducted after witnessing a failed American cleaning demonstration, confirmed his theory. Suction, not blowing, was the key to effective cleaning. Booth would go on to create the first powerful vacuum cleaner, a massive horse-drawn contraption that parked outside of homes with long hoses that were fed into windows and doors. It was a sensation among London's elite, who threw parties to show off this marvelous new cleaning method. Even King Edward VII was impressed, ordering machines for Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, making the British monarchy the first royal owners of vacuum cleaners. But the true commercialization of the vacuum would happen across the Atlantic. In 1908, a struggling Ohio leather and saddle maker named W.H. Boss Hoover, looking to diversify as automobiles replaced horses, purchased the rights to an electric carpet sweeper invented by an asthmatic janitor, James Murray Springler. This device, essentially an electric fan that sucked dust into a pillowcase attached to a broomstick, would become the prototype for virtually all vacuums to follow. For the next 7 decades or so, vacuum cleaners would change remarkably little in their fundamental design. Yes, there were some improvements. Electrolux introduced the cylinder models in 1913, and in 1936, the Hoover Jr. added rotating brushes. But the central technology remained essentially unchanged. A motor-driven fan sucking air and dust through a cloth paper bag that would filter out the dirt. And this is where James Dyson enters, because what nobody seemed to notice or perhaps care about was a fundamental flaw in the design. The moment you started using these vacuums, they began to lose suction as the pores in the bags clogged with fine dust particles. Dyson was experiencing the suction issue with his own Hoover Jr. when he recalled a pivotal moment in the ball barrel manufacturing process that he was working on. Dyson had encountered a problem with the powder coating plant used to paint the ball barrel frames. The process they were using created a significant amount of waste. When spraying the metal frames, much of the powder would miss its target and would need to be collected. The initial solution was a huge cloth screen that acted as a filter with a powerful fan behind it to create suction. But the screen would clog within an hour, halting production while workers cleaned it. Exactly the same problem that plagued vacuum cleaners worldwide, just on an industrial scale. When Dyson inquired about how larger factories solved this problem, he was told they used something called a cyclone, a huge canonical device that used centrifugal force to separate particles from the air without filters or screens. Intrigued but unable to afford this 75,000-pound machine he was quoted to install, Dyson did what innovators have done throughout history. He decided to simply build his own. One night, he drove up to a nearby sawmill that had one of those cyclones installed, parked a distance away, and under the cover of darkness, climbed the fence. By moonlight, he examined and sketched the 30-foot cone, trying to understand exactly how it worked and what its proportions were. The next day, a Sunday, Dyson and his team welded together a 30-foot cyclone from sheets of steel, cut a hole in the factory roof, and installed their creation. When they started the production line, the results were immediate and dramatic. The powder that missed the frames was sucked up, spiraled through the cyclone, and collected into a bag at the bottom, while the clean air escaped through the top. No stoppages, no clogging. And that's when the connection suddenly clicked in Dyson's mind. That evening, driving home through a storm, his thoughts raced. If industrial cyclones could separate dust from air without filters, why couldn't the same principle work in miniature in a household vacuum cleaner? Arriving home, Dyson immediately set to work. He tore the bag off his Hoover Jr. and tried vacuuming without it. The result was a horrible spray of dust blown into the room. Next, he fashioned a foot-long cone from cardboard, covered it in tape to make it airtight, and attached it to the cleaner. He connected the outlet to the machine where the bag had been to the top of his makeshift cyclone. When he flipped the switch, instead of the dust storm he half expected, the vacuum ran smoothly. After a few minutes, he disconnected his cardboard construction and peered inside to find a deposit of dust in the bottom of the cone. He proceeded to vacuum his entire house, repeatedly checking his creation to confirm that it wasn't a dream. "I was the only man in the world with a bagless vacuum cleaner," Dyson later wrote. He could hardly sleep that night, his mind racing with possibilities. By morning, he knew this wasn't just an improvement to an existing product. It was a fundamental reimagining of how vacuum cleaners could work. What Dyson didn't know that October night was that his moment of inspiration would lead to 5 years of obsessive and painstaking development and refinement. His initial cardboard prototype demonstrated the principle, but creating a practical, efficient, and manufacturable product would prove far more challenging. As Dyson tells it, after that initial eureka, it was a long haul to the dual cyclone, so called because the outer cyclone, rotating at 200 miles per hour, removes large debris and most of the dust, while an inner cyclone, rotating at 924 miles per hour, creates huge gravitational force and drives the finest dust, even particles of cigarette smoke, out of the air. This 5-year period tested not only Dyson's engineering acumen, but his personal resilience. The family lived on his wife's modest income as an art teacher, while James obsessively worked on prototype after prototype in his workshop while racking up ever-increasing amounts of debt. These were lean years, with young children to raise and a mortgage to pay, and interest rates among the highest they've ever been. Yet Dyson remained fixated on solving this single problem. In one sense, it was all a bit of a disaster, he admitted. I had no job, no income, and a sizable mortgage to pay off. Yet this moment of apparent crisis was actually the beginning of his greatest work. What's remarkable about Dyson's process wasn't just the sheer number of prototypes, though that number has become legendary, but the methodical approach to each iteration. Every failure pointed to a specific problem that needed solving. The airflow wasn't right. The cyclone's proportions were off. The dust separation wasn't efficient enough. By the time he had achieved a working design in 1983, with the launch of the G-Force in Japan, Dyson had created 5,127 prototypes, a number that has become mythical in innovation circles. I made 5,127 prototypes of my vacuum before I got it right, he famously stated. That means there were 5,126 failures, but I learned from each one. That's how I came up with a solution. So I didn't mind failure. This embrace of failure as a teaching tool rather than a dead end places Dyson in the tradition of Thomas Edison, who reportedly found 10,000 ways not to make the light bulb before finding one that worked. Edison's famous quote, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work," could just as easily have come from Dyson's mouth. Indeed, Dyson later articulated a similar philosophy. Enjoy failure and learn from it. You never learn from success. With a working prototype finally in hand, after 5 years, Dyson thought the hardest part was over. Little did he know it was just beginning. He pitched the established vacuum manufacturers a no-brainer, a bagless vacuum cleaner that never lost suction. It wasn't theory, he could show them a prototype, but the response was like a door slamming in his face. James, if there were a better kind of vacuum cleaner, Hoover or Electrolux would have invented it, they scoffed. It's the smug dismissal you hear in entrepreneurial lore, the assumption that if it's possible, the big dogs would have already done it. Western Union said the same thing about the telephone. IBM shrugged about the personal computer. Kodak about the digital camera. For Dyson, this didn't kill his drive, it lit a fire. This is Clayton Christensen's innovation dilemma in action. Successful companies locked into their current customers and profits miss disruptive innovations that seem inferior at first, but eventually upend everything. The vacuum giants weren't just blind, they were trapped because their business model ran on the razor and blades model, cranking out high-margin replacement bags. A bagless vacuum didn't just challenge their technology, it threatened their whole way of business. The established players weren't merely overlooking Dyson's invention, they were actively protecting their golden goose. They'd optimize everything from manufacturing and marketing and distribution, all to sell bags. Why risk that for some unproven gizmo? It's the rational call until it's not. The pattern is predictable. First, they ignore the innovation. It can't work. Then they dismiss it. It's not important. And then they panic when it's too late. Elon Musk hit this wall with Tesla. Steve Jobs smashed through it with the iPod. Incumbents all over the world can't imagine a different future, and that's the crack that disruptors exploit. Charlie Munger calls it commitment and consistency bias. Once you're all in on a path, Changing feels impossible, even when the evidence screams otherwise. This psychological trap transforms market leaders into sitting ducks. For Dyson, the rejection meant going solo, building and selling his invention without the big players. Daunting, sure, but he'd come too far to quit. Unable to find an existing manufacturer in the UK willing to produce his vacuum, Dyson turned to Japan, where a licensing deal with a company called Apex allowed the G-Force cleaner to be marketed as a luxury item, selling for the equivalent of $2,000. Although this high-end positioning didn't reflect Dyson's original vision for wide market adoption, it provided two crucial things: income and validation. It proved that people, at least in Japan, were willing to pay a premium for a breakthrough in cleaning technology. Royalties from Japan soon began flowing back to Britain, enabling Dyson to take bold steps that many had warned were foolish. He had tried to find a partner to manufacture this with him, but he couldn't find one. So he decided that he was going to open his own manufacturing facility. And by 1993, he introduced the Dyson DC-01 to the UK market, an unapologetically unusual machine. With bright colors, transparent dustbins, and an exposed cyclone system, the vacuum's design flew in the face of every convention that had been defined in the industry. As Dyson would later remark, going against established expert thinking was a huge risk. No one could confirm that what we were doing was a good idea. Everyone, in fact, confirmed the reverse. If, however, we had believed the science and not trusted our instincts, we would have ended up following the path of dull conformity. Dyson believed in himself, even though nobody else believed in him. The Dyson DC-01's central selling point, the only vacuum cleaner that doesn't lose suction, wasn't just a clever tagline. It laid bare what Dyson viewed as the fundamental flaw of the bag-based vacuums, a loss of performance the moment the bag began filling. That indictment of the entire industry didn't just intrigue curious homeowners, it challenged competitors who could no longer claim bags were good enough. Dyson's approach quickly drew attention, and initial sales, though modest, began to surge as word spread about the machine's staggering suction power and ease of emptying. By 1995, it had become the best-selling vacuum cleaner in the UK, topping the very brands that had once dismissed Dyson's idea. Meanwhile, the industry's knee-jerk reaction was to hastily develop bagless technologies of their own, a scramble that validated the cyclone-based system. But thoughtfully, Dyson had safeguarded his inventions with over 100 patents, a legal moat that forced his rivals to tread very carefully. When Hoover released a suspiciously similar product, Dyson stood his ground in court. He won over 4 million British pounds in damages, reinforcing the message that real innovation can and should be protected. As he would insist, by its very nature, pioneering will not always be successful. We don't start these ventures with the inevitability of success. We are too aware that we may well fail. But I also think if we fail, better drown than duffers. What began in a cramped kitchen amid cardboard prototypes and relentless late-night tinkering evolved into a global empire. Dyson's story extended well beyond vacuums, branching into hand dryers, fans, hair care, and even the ambitious foray into electric vehicles. Yet the products themselves were less significant than the spirit of invention they represented. The real legacy was Dyson's determined belief that everyday objects could and should be rethought from the ground up. In his view, following the path of dull conformity is precisely how incumbents remain stuck. His success not only caused manufacturers to re-examine their own design assumptions, but it also planted a broader realization. Where people find persistent frustrations, they can and should innovate. For James Dyson, that conviction, honed through adversity in the UK and validated in Japan, transformed one man's frustration with a vacuum bag into a multi-billion-dollar business and ultimately a model for reimagining the objects we use every day. By the late 1990s, with his vacuum cleaners flying off the shelves and the Dyson name fast becoming synonymous with vacuums, James Dyson faced the standard menu of options awaiting any successful entrepreneur. Sell to a larger company, take the business public, or perhaps just ease into a comfortable role as chairman. Delegate the hard work and enjoy the fruits of your labor. It was, after all, what everyone expected. Everyone, that is, except for James Dyson. Instead, he did something that left business analysts scratching their heads. He plowed enormous amounts of money back into research and development. While competitors were typically allocating 2 to 3% of revenue to research and development, Dyson was routinely investing 20% or more. This wasn't just an abstract commitment to innovation, it was a fundamental challenge to the conventional wisdom of how to run a business. "I'm not interested in appearing on some rich list," Dyson remarked with characteristic dismissiveness toward the trapping of wealth. What's far more satisfying is seeing something you've designed on someone's kitchen counter or hearing someone talk about their Dyson as if it's a family member. In a business landscape dominated by the relentless quarterly results focus of publicly traded companies, Dyson's passion-driven approach stood out like one of his vacuum cleaners in a sea of beige appliances. By keeping the company private and maintaining control, he ensured that engineering excellence, not shareholder demands, drove the decision-making. The irony, this stubborn refusal to focus on profit ultimately proved more profitable than a profit-first strategy would have been. By creating better products rather than just better marketed ones, Dyson built a brand that commanded premium prices and inspired unusual loyalty amongst its customers, achievements that no amount of clever advertising could accomplish. In 2006, if you had walked into a public restroom and seen someone seemingly karate chopping the air beneath a strange metal contraption mounted on the wall, you would have witnessed one of Dyson's newest converts experiencing the Airblade hairdryer for the first time. The traditional hairdryers had worked on a simple but ineffective principle: blow warm air over wet hands and hope for evaporation. The process was slow, energy inefficient, and often left hands damp enough that most people would give up and wipe them on their pants. The Airblade, in typical Dyson fashion, attacked the problem from a completely different angle, using sheets of high-velocity, unheated air to physically scrape water from hands, drying them in just 10 to 12 seconds instead of the typical 30 to 45. This wasn't just a marginally better hand dryer, it was a fundamental rethinking of what hand dryers could be. And like the vacuum before it, it solved an everyday frustration most people had simply accepted as normal. Then in 2009 came perhaps the most visually striking Dyson innovation, the air multiplier, also known as the bladeless fan. With its distinctive ring design, it eliminated the chopping blades of traditional fans, making them safer and easier to clean while delivering smoother airflow. The product's alien appearance became instantly iconic, a physical manifestation of Dyson's philosophy that when function is properly executed, distinctive form follows naturally. In testing the air multiplier, Dyson engineers sometimes found themselves sticking their heads through the empty ring, a demonstration that would later become a staple of Dyson's public appearances with the product. It was also emblematic of the company's playful approach to serious engineering. 8 years later, Dyson tackled an appliance that hadn't seen meaningful innovation since the 1960s, the hairdryer. Traditional models were loud, heavy, and prone to overheating, and often damaged the hair. The Supersonic, with its miniaturized motor in the handle rather than the head, addressed all of these issues while exemplifying another Dyson principle. Sometimes the most significant innovations come from solving the least glamorous problems. To create the Supersonic, engineers tested 1,010 miles of hair to crack and heat damage. Hundreds of prototypes later, they shrunk the motor into the handle. Throughout these expansions, Dyson maintained his characteristic approach to product development, expressed in his oft-quoted observation: "Everything can be improved, you just have to look for the frustration." This simple yet profound insight cuts to the heart of Dyson's innovation philosophy. Rather than starting with market research or competitor analysis, the standard playbook for product development, Dyson products began with identifying everyday frustrations that people have come to accept as normal. Each new product category followed the same pattern. Find a common device that doesn't work as well as it could and reimagine it from first principles. It's a philosophy that seems obvious in retrospect, yet remains strikingly rare in practice. Visit Dyson's headquarters and you won't find the standard corporate divisions between thinkers and doers. Unlike many companies where engineers design and technicians build and testers evaluate, Dyson engineers are involved throughout the entire process, a reflection of Dyson's own hands-on approach. Our engineers build their own prototypes and test them so we understand how and why they might fail, Dyson explains. This isn't just a nice philosophical stance. It's a practical recognition that those designing products need intimate knowledge of their real-world performance. The tighter the feedback loop between design and function, the faster innovation happens. This philosophy extends to Dyson's hiring practices, where the company often recruits engineers straight from universities. The preference for fresh minds, unencumbered by industry conventions, over experienced professionals who might reflexively say that's not how we do it, isn't just about youthful energy, it's about maintaining the company's ability to question basic assumptions. When developing a new product, Dyson teams are encouraged to build and test rapidly, embracing failure as an education, just as James Dyson did with his 5,127 vacuum prototypes. The company's laboratories have evolved into a testing wonderland, featuring everything from acoustic chambers for measuring noise to robotic arms that simulate years of usage in accelerated time. Marketing considerations will not ignore take a clear backseat to engineering excellence. Stories are abound of Dyson rejecting market-ready products because some aspect of their performance didn't meet his exacting standards, often to the frustration of the company's commercial teams eager to meet launch deadlines. We were criticized for the short run time, Dyson notes about their first battery-powered devices, a decision that went against conventional wisdom but proved correct as battery technology improved. The company's willingness to make unpopular short-term decisions in service of a long-term vision is perhaps its most distinctive characteristic in an industry typically driven by immediate sales considerations. This approach isn't without its cause. Dyson products are notoriously expensive to develop and consequently command premium prices. But this alignment of higher costs with genuinely superior performance has created a virtuous cycle. Customers willing to pay more for better products fuel the R&D that creates the next generation of innovations. It's a business model that feels almost quaint in its straightforwardness. Make things that work better, charge more for them, and use the profits to make even more better things. If innovation is the lifeblood of Dyson's business, then patents are its immune system, and James Dyson has proven himself just as tenacious in defending his intellectual property as he was in developing it in the first place. The most famous of these legal battles was Dyson's 1999 lawsuit against Hoover for patent infringement. After Dyson's vacuum cleaner became a clear market success, Hoover introduced its own bagless model using similar cyclone technology. Dyson sued, and after a 5-year legal battle, won damages of 4 million British pounds. This victory wasn't significant just financially, but it was really symbolically significant for Dyson, establishing that even a relatively new company could successfully defend its intellectual property against an industry giant. It sent a clear message that Dyson wouldn't be intimidated by larger competitors attempting to copy his innovations. For Dyson, patents aren't merely legal instruments, but essential safeguards that make innovation economically viable. Without patent protection, the enormous investments required to develop truly new technologies would be financially unjustifiable, as competitors could simply copy successful products without bearing the R&D costs. This stance hasn't been without controversy. Critics argue that aggressive patent enforcement can stifle innovation by preventing others from building on existing ideas. But Dyson counters that genuine innovation means creating something truly new, not incrementally modifying something. In my view, Dyson argues, patents need a longer life to reflect today's long research and development cycles. It's a perspective that places him somewhat at odds with the open source movement and those who believe that looser intellectual property restrictions would accelerate innovation. Yet it's hard to argue with the results. Without the protection of patents, would Dyson have been able to sustain the massive R&D investments that produced such a stream of innovative products? This question really cuts to the heart of how societies balance incentives for individual innovators against the broader benefits of shared knowledge. Perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Dyson's business trajectory is his steadfast refusal to sell the company or take it public, despite numerous lucrative offers. This decision has allowed him to maintain complete control over the company's direction and priorities, a luxury few entrepreneurs enjoy in the long term. In an era where founders often exit their companies through acquisition or IPO within a decade of starting them, Dyson's 44-year tenure as the leader and sole owner of his company is remarkable. This longevity has enabled him to pursue a consistent vision without the pressures that come from external shareholders demanding quarterly results or strategic pivots. The benefits of this approach are evident in Dyson's ability to make decisions that might appear counterintuitive in the short run, but align with his long-term vision. For example, when Dyson decided to invest $2.5 billion in developing an electric car, a project that was ultimately abandoned in 2019, he did so without having to justify the massive expenditure to shareholders or a board of directors. This freedom comes with a significant financial trade-off. By keeping the company private, Dyson delayed his own financial gratification for decades. While his contemporaries who founded and sold companies became wealthy much earlier in their careers, Dyson's wealth remained largely on paper until much later in life. The lesson here isn't that every entrepreneur should keep their company ownership indefinitely. That path isn't realistic or desirable for a lot of ventures. Rather, it's that maintaining sufficient control to pursue your vision can be worth more than maximizing short-term financial returns. In Britain, where entrepreneurs at the earliest opportunity often sell out to take their companies public, Dyson's approach stands out as particularly unusual. He has commanded that his tenacity to cash out quick suggests either a lack of passion for the business itself or a fear of losing everything before having a chance to profit. By contrast, Dyson's unwillingness to relinquish control reflects a fundamentally different relationship to his creation, not merely as a vehicle for wealth generation, but a platform for continuing innovation and impact. Let's recap Dyson's path from art school graduate to billionaire inventor and industrialist. What's most striking here is the consistency of his approach across more than 4 decades of dramatic change. From the loss of his father at a young age through his education in design rather than engineering to his early career working under Jeremy Fry, these formative experiences shaped the unconventional approach that would later define his business career. The ball barrel represented his first commercial success, but also his first harsh business lesson when he lost control of the company to his partners. This experience informed his later insistence on maintaining ownership and control of Dyson, a decision that would prove critical to his ability to pursue long-term innovation. The development of the cyclonic vacuum cleaner with its famous 5,127 prototypes over 5 years exemplifies the persistence that became Dyson's hallmark. Unable to interest existing manufacturers in his invention, he was forced to commercialize it himself, first through licensing in Japan and later through direct manufacturing and sales. After achieving success in vacuum cleaners, Dyson systematically applied his engineering principles to other categories: hand dryers, fans, hairdryers, air purifiers, each time reimagining products that had seen little fundamental innovation for decades. Throughout this journey, Dyson maintained a consistent philosophy: identify everyday frustrations, question conventional solutions, iterate relentlessly toward better alternatives, and never compromise on engineering excellence. What appears from an outsider as an overnight success was in reality a 15-year journey from initial insight to commercial triumph. It was 5 years before the G-Force, but it was 15 before he really took off in the UK. And there's a whole section in the book about how his partners in Japan sort of swindled him a bit, which it's worth reading for sure. James Dyson is a reminder that genuine innovation often requires a time horizon longer than most businesses or investors are willing to contemplate. Those long runs that he did so early on in life served as great training ground for going through the grind. This philosophy extends beyond products to Dyson's approach to education, intellectual property, and business ownership. A comprehensive vision of how innovation should work, not just within his company, but within society as a whole. It's a vision that challenges conventional wisdom at nearly every turn, yet has proven remarkably effective in practice. In a world increasingly dominated by short-term thinking, Dyson stands out as a testament to the power of playing the long game, and a reminder that the most revolutionary innovations begin with nothing more than a willingness to ask, isn't there a better way? Okay, let's go over my reflections and some of the lessons learned from James Dyson's incredible story. So the first, persistence is key. His story isn't about genius. It's really about persistence, the same as Estee Lauder. He built 5,127 prototypes over 5 years to launch the G-Force in Japan, and then spent another decade perfecting the DC-01 for the world. Innovation meant questioning experts, embracing failure, and owning his vision. He was told no over and over again. He was sued. He was nearly bankrupt with debt, yet he didn't give up. 2, master your circumstances. Dyson learned early that losing control can sink you. With the C-Truck, he watched shareholders sell out when times got tough. With the ball barrow, he was ousted despite his breakthroughs. These mishaps taught him to master his fate, keeping an ironclad control over IP and the company itself. It's a hidden key to Berkshire Hathaway's success too. Own your destiny or others will. At dinner one night, I was talking with Charlie Munger, and I asked him for the unconventional sort of things that people don't appreciate as much about Berkshire Hathaway's success as he might think that they should. And one of the things that he mentioned to me was, he said, Warren and I have rarely been forced into a bad decision. And I took that to think about positioning a lot. You know, if an outside shareholder can come in and start dictating what you do or where you save money or what you do with the cash on your balance sheet and change your strategy, you can't play out your vision. You can't play the long game. You're instantly playing the short game. And so I think that is a really underappreciated aspect of Berkshire Hathaway's success. I also think it's a really underappreciated aspect of Dyson's success. He's maintained this company now since the 1970s, and he's been able to execute on his vision because nobody can come in and tell him what to do. 3, capacity to take pain. Behind any great achievement lies the capacity to take pain. If you want to see your vision through to the end, there's going to be ups and downs. There's not only going to be financial pain, there's going to be emotional and psychological pain. You have to be willing to look different. You have to be willing to do things different. And, you know, Dyson, from those solitary long runs as a kid to legal battles, mounting debt, prototypes, numerous rejections, he just took the lumps and kept going. This isn't to say that he didn't have ups and downs. And I suspect, although the book didn't lean into it a lot, that his partner played a key role here too. And your partner plays a really big role in your psychology and whether you keep going or whether you give up. And the key here is believing in yourself, even when others don't or won't. 4, the standard was excellence. He didn't release a product until it was perfect. He didn't flinch at charging more for a vacuum cleaner or plowing 20% of revenue into R&D, 7 times the industry norm. He bet on excellence, not shortcuts. Profits naturally follow excellence. 5, he didn't dilute the message. People don't want a product that does 10 things with average ability. They want a product that does one thing with above average ability. Exceptionally good at one thing is better than average at a lot of things. When it was time to market the Dual Cyclone, he focused on its unmatched suction, nothing else. He didn't dilute the message. 6, action leads to progress. Dyson didn't just dream. He built. From rigging a Cyclone for the ball barrow factory to testing countless prototypes himself, he learned to go build it and see. Progress comes from starting. 7, founders should run companies, or at least people that deeply care. It'll be interesting to see what Dyson does with his legacy, but I suspect he won't be passing the business over to an MBA, but rather an engineer who cares deeply about the product, about innovation, about the people working for the company. 8, there are billion-dollar ideas in common frustrations. Forget market research or copying competitors. Dyson started with what annoyed him. His vacuum cleaner losing suction, wheelbarrows tipping over and getting stuck, hand dryers failing. From the ball barrow to the air blade, he reimagined the ordinary from first principles up. If you're looking for ideas, look at where you're frustrated. 9, play the long game. At nearly every opportunity where Dyson can make a choice between the short term and the long term, he chooses the long term. I hope you loved this book as much as I did. I think James Dyson is such an incredible character and person. Hopefully we can get him on the podcast. That would be amazing. If not, if you're looking to learn more about him, highly recommend you pick up his autobiography, Against the Odds. James Dyson is a force of will. He's a model of persistence, and I want to see him keep going. Thanks for listening and learning. Thanks for listening and learning with us. For a complete list of episodes, show notes, transcripts, and more, go to fs.blog/podcast or just Google The Knowledge Project. The Farnham Street blog is also where you can learn more about my new book, Clear Thinking, Turning Ordinary Moments into Extraordinary Results. It's a transformative guide that hands you the tools to master your fate, sharpen your decision-making, and set yourself up for unparalleled success. Learn more at fs.blog/clear. Until next time.